Welcome to the Daily Globe. Please subscribe and hit the bell icon for more breaking updates. In a stunning and unexpected move that has sent shockwaves through Washington and beyond, the U.S. Supreme Court has declined to hear the Trump administration's high-profile appeal regarding emergency tariffs. This decision, announced early this morning, caught many legal experts and policymakers off guard, as the case was widely seen as a potential landmark in defining the limits of presidential power over international trade. The refusal to take up the case effectively leaves in place a lower court's ruling, which had already generated intense debate across the political spectrum. As a direct result, the controversial emergency tariffs, imposed on billions of dollars worth of imported goods, are now set to end, bringing immediate relief to importers, retailers, and manufacturers who have struggled with higher costs and supply chain disruptions for months. The news has been met with a collective sigh of relief from many sectors of the U.S. economy, especially those that rely heavily on global supply chains and international trade partnerships. The Supreme Court's decision upholds a lower court's finding that President Trump exceeded his legal authority when he enacted the tariffs under emergency powers. This marks a pivotal moment in the ongoing battle over the separation of powers, raising fundamental questions about the extent of presidential control over trade policy. Legal scholars say this could set a precedent for future administrations, potentially curbing the executive branch's ability to unilaterally impose sweeping economic measures without congressional approval. For American businesses and consumers, the end of these tariffs means more than just lower prices at the checkout counter. Small business owners, who have been squeezed by rising costs, are hopeful that this decision will restore some much-needed stability and predictability to their operations. Shoppers may soon see prices drop on everyday goods, while factory workers and manufacturers anticipate a boost in demand as supply chains normalize and international partners regain confidence in U.S. trade policy. However, the Supreme Court's move also forces a dramatic recalibration of U.S. trade policy. With the legal landscape now changed, government officials and trade negotiators must quickly adapt to a new reality, one where the president's authority is more clearly checked by the courts and, potentially, by Congress. This could lead to a more collaborative approach to trade policy, but it also introduces new uncertainties as lawmakers and the administration scramble to respond. With the tariff set to expire in just 2 weeks, the administration is already signaling that it will pursue a new legal strategy, possibly seeking alternative avenues to achieve its trade objectives. Behind closed doors, White House officials and legal advisors are reportedly exploring legislative options and preparing for renewed negotiations with Congress. The coming days are expected to be filled with intense debate and political maneuvering as all sides try to shape the future of U.S. trade policy. One thing is clear: the Supreme Court's decision has reignited the national conversation about the balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. As senators and representatives debate the implications on Capitol Hill, the outcome will have far-reaching consequences not just for the U.S. economy, but for global markets and America's role in international trade. The debate over presidential power and trade is far from over, and the world is watching closely to see what happens next. President Trump's tariffs began as part of his promise to protect American industries, using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, to bypass Congress. The administration imposed sweeping tariffs, claiming they were necessary for national security and fair trade. But critics argued IEEPA was never meant for broad, long-term economic measures. Businesses and foreign governments pushed back, warning of higher prices, disrupted supply chains, and retaliatory tariffs. The legal challenge centered on whether the president could use emergency powers to impose what amounted to new taxes, powers the Constitution reserves for Congress. The fight against the tariffs was led not by corporate giants, but by small businesses like VOS Selections, a New York wine importer. These were family-run shops, neighborhood restaurants, and independent importers, people whose livelihoods depended on the ability to bring in unique wines and specialty foods from abroad. For them, the tariffs weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were a direct threat to their survival, putting jobs, dreams, and entire communities at risk. Many of these businesses had been built over decades, passed down through generations, and now faced the possibility of closing their doors for good. But these small businesses weren't alone. Soon, a coalition of states joined the fight, recognizing that the impact of the tariffs would ripple far beyond city limits. State officials from across the country saw how local economies, jobs, and even state tax revenues were at stake. They understood that the tariffs could devastate not just wine shops in New York, but farmers in California, distributors in Texas, and restaurant owners in Illinois. This unlikely alliance of small business owners and state governments formed a united front, determined to challenge what they saw as an overreach of federal power. Together, they argued that the tariffs threatened their very existence, and more importantly, violated the Constitution. Their case centered on a fundamental question: could the president impose sweeping new taxes without the approval of Congress? The Constitution gives Congress the power to levy taxes and regulate trade, and these plaintiffs believed that bypassing this process set a dangerous precedent for unchecked executive authority. Their lawsuit, VOS Selections Inc. v. Trump, quickly became a national test of executive power. It wasn't just about wine or tariffs anymore, it was about the balance of power in American government. States joined the case to protect their economies and to stand up for the constitutional principle that no one branch should have unchecked authority over the nation's economic fate. The plaintiffs insisted that the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, was never meant to be used for broad economic policy. It was designed for targeted sanctions in times of true national emergency, not as a tool for sweeping tariffs that could reshape entire industries. They argued that only Congress had the constitutional authority to impose such far-reaching economic measures, and that allowing the president to do so would undermine the very foundation of American democracy. Through determination and unity, these small business owners and state officials transformed what began as a local business fight into a landmark constitutional battle, one that would test the limits of presidential power and the resilience of American democracy itself. The case climbed quickly through the courts, with the Court of International Trade first halting the tariffs, finding the president likely exceeded his authority. The Trump administration appealed, but the Federal Circuit affirmed. IEPA does not allow the president to impose broad, long-term tariffs. Only Congress can tax. The court allowed the tariffs to remain until October 14th, giving the administration time to seek Supreme Court review. The administration argued the ruling dangerously limited presidential crisis powers, but the judiciary stood firm on the separation of powers. Billions in trade and a core constitutional principle now hung in the balance. On September 28, 2025, the Supreme Court quietly denied the administration's appeal, making the Federal Circuit's decision final. The ruling confirms the president overstepped by using IEPA to impose tariffs, and the tariffs will be lifted on October 14th. For businesses and states, it's a hard-won victory. For the administration, a major defeat and a forced policy reversal. The decision reinforces the judiciary's role as a check on executive power and clarifies that emergency statutes can't be used to create new taxes. This precedent will shape future administrations and the limits of presidential authority. With the tariffs ending, importers and small businesses like VOS Selections will see immediate relief. For many, this means lower costs on goods, more predictable supply chains, and the ability to plan for the future with greater confidence. Shop owners who have struggled with rising prices can now breathe a little easier, and some may even pass those savings on to their customers. However, this relief comes with a new set of challenges. The sudden change in trade policy has left many business owners wondering what comes next. Will the market stabilize, or will new regulations disrupt their operations again? The uncertainty is palpable, and while some celebrate, others remain cautious, knowing that global trade is rarely predictable for long. Farmers, who were promised aid funded by tariff revenue, now face doubts about government support as that funding disappears. Many in rural America had come to rely on these subsidies to offset the losses caused by retaliatory tariffs from other countries. Without this financial cushion, some farmers are left in a precarious position, unsure how they will make ends meet. The end of tariffs may lower some input costs, but it also removes a key source of government assistance. As a result, agricultural communities are bracing for a period of adjustment, with some calling for new forms of support or policy changes to help them weather the transition. Meanwhile, the administration is already preparing to use Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, which allows tariffs for national security reasons. This move could potentially affect an even broader range of imports, from steel and aluminum to everyday consumer goods. Lawmakers and industry leaders are watching closely, debating whether these new measures are truly about protecting national interests, or simply another way to influence global trade. The possibility of fresh tariffs has many companies on edge, as they try to anticipate which products might be targeted next and how it could impact their bottom line. While some sectors get a break from the immediate pressure of tariffs, the threat of new, broader tariffs looms large. This ongoing uncertainty keeps businesses, investors, and workers on high alert. Factory floors are abuzz with speculation, boardrooms are filled with urgent strategy sessions, and the stock market reacts to every new headline. For many, the end of one trade war does not mean the end of trade tensions. Instead, it signals a new phase of unpredictability, where every policy announcement can have ripple effects across the economy. Ultimately, the next moves from the White House will determine if this is truly the end of one trade war or merely the beginning of another. The decisions made in Washington will shape the future for businesses, farmers, and consumers alike. As the nation waits for clarity, one thing is certain: the story of American trade policy is far from over, and its impact will be felt in every corner of the country. The end of the tariffs is expected to lower costs for businesses and consumers, especially in industries like wine, electronics, and retail. Billions will no longer be paid in tariffs, freeing up capital and potentially lowering prices on everyday goods. However, farmers lose promised aid, and the administration's plan for new Section 232 tariffs could trigger even broader trade conflicts and price hikes. The economic outlook remains uncertain, as new tariffs could erase gains and spark further retaliation. For American families, the impact will be felt in the prices they pay and the stability of their jobs. Legal scholars call the Supreme Court's move a crucial check on executive power, reaffirming that only Congress can levy taxes. Experts warn, however, that the administration's pivot to Section 232, using national security as justification, could allow even broader tariffs, harder to challenge in court. Economists see the ruling as a win for free trade, but worry about ongoing instability if the White House continues unilateral trade actions. Many believe Congress must now act to clarify or limit the emergency powers it delegates to the president. The Supreme Court has passed the ball to lawmakers. Will they reclaim their constitutional authority? The Supreme Court's decision delivers a decisive check on presidential power and relief for businesses and consumers, but the story is far from over. The administration's intent to use new legal justifications for tariffs means the fight over trade and executive authority will continue. The ruling highlights the importance of the separation of powers and the real-world impact of constitutional battles. As the White House, Congress, and courts continue to clash over economic policy, the outcome will shape America's future and affect every citizen. The next chapter in this high-stakes struggle is just beginning.